Dr. Joel Gator, welcome to the Urban Pharmacy Podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, so today we are talking children's health, and you are, what are you? Can you tell us what you do and how that all started?
Yeah, I'm a pediatrician, but I also focus on integrative medicine and holistic health. So I did all the regular pediatric training. I trained in a great Western medicine program, but I got a little bit frustrated with the regular system and the super short visits and medications for everything all of the time. And I'm not against Western medicine at all. I say this all the time. I'm not against Western medicine. I think we've made amazing strides in modern medicine, and there are times where a medicine like an antibiotic can save your life, or you need a steroid or need an MRI, and that's great, but just most of the time we don't need that. And there's so many opportunities where we can also learn from and use natural medicines or a more holistic approach to health, especially when it comes to chronic disease, which is one of the big issues that we're facing these days in terms of eczema and allergies and all sorts of things. And so I just feel like we need to be balancing the best of both worlds, and taking the best knowledge from modern medicine and alternative health, or other modalities, and kind of bringing those together for our health, because we can see our everybody's health is suffering these days: mental health, kids, chronic disease, everything. And so we're doing something wrong, and we need to be changing up what we're doing a little bit, I think, and focusing on you know the whole person, the whole child.
Yes, and also just kind of focusing on prevention, which is like so hard, especially when you can't see, especially if you're seeing children probably that are, well at this moment, but
Mhm.
with our society and like all of the all of the processed foods and the colorants and the preservatives and all the toxins and all that stuff, like I just feel like even if kids aren't showing symptoms now, I feel it's amazing to have doctors like you that are taking a more holistic approach that can help to get people on a good lifestyle, even if they're not showing symptoms yet. Just, having a doctor like that is incredible. So you are practicing in California right now?
Correct. Yeah, and I just want to say to what you said. Yeah, that is one of the big things that I really want to get out there, and that's why I come on podcasts and talk as much as I can, because yeah, we're much better, I think, at treating disease in general, and that's what was a big focus for so many decades. But if you look at the statistics now, it's like about 50% of kids have a chronic disease, more than that percentage in adults have a chronic disease. And so we have to think about what we're doing in a preventative way, because otherwise your kids are going to have a chronic disease if they don't already have one, right? If you have two kids, that means one's going to have some sort of chronic disease if they don't already have one. And that's not okay, right? That's definitely not okay. That means we're doing a lot wrong, and we need to be focused on what we're doing today, every choice that we make to try to change that trajectory. Otherwise, every kid's going to have a chronic disease. We're all going to be on medication in a couple of years if this doesn't change. And I mean, it's crazy scary how fast it's changing. Like diabetes rates,
Yeah.
doubled in some age populations in the last couple of years. It's like doubled.
I wanted to ask
What's
you
going on?
actually. I wanted to ask you about diabetes, so maybe we should just say that. We should just do that now. I wanted to. This interview is basically most of the questions. Some of them are mine. They're peppered in here, but most of them are just from my audience and the people that listen to this podcast and are in my, are my clients. And I, that was one of my last questions. I wanted to ask you about actually childhood, like adolescent diabetes and obesity rates. And is this something that you're seeing on a daily basis in your practice?
So it's definitely something that we're seeing more. I think for me, I have a very self-selecting population of patients that, for the most part, are pretty health conscious. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't see a ton of it in my office, honestly. But I think that's because of the nature of the patients that choose to come to our office. They're already a little bit health conscious often, so they're thinking about these. Not that there aren't some kids that are a little, bigger, or parents aren't couldn't work on some of these things for sure. But I think comparatively to the population, it's not exactly the same. But definitely, I do a lot of work online and all sorts of other stuff, and without question, and just I mean walking around in general, being outside, the obesity rates are through the roof, and it's terrifying. I mean, you look around and you look at photos from 50 years ago, you look at photos from today, you go to Disneyland or whatever, you just look around and you can see that people are living an unhealthy lifestyle. And obesity and being overweight comes with a lot of potential health complications, and we see that in the last couple of years more than ever. And really it's in our face, and we saw it during the pandemic, right? We know what the biggest risk factors were, and it was having, you know, pre-existing conditions and being overweight or obese, that those are significant risk factors. That's not new. That's true of basically everything. If you have some sort of pre-existing condition, then you're a risk for basically everything, and that's because your body just doesn't have the fuel, the nutrients that it needs to deal with whatever comes its way. And it's also dealing with the food that you're eating, and you know, things are just not working as well as they potentially could be if we were living a more healthy lifestyle. And that's just what I want to impart on people. It's not about, you know, body image per se. I mean, we can love ourselves no matter who we are, but there are health complications that come along with not eating very healthy and not exercising, and these are very vital, you know, factors that are involved in human life. We need to be healthy to we need to take care of our health if we want to be healthy, right? These are basic common sense kind of stuff, but we have forgotten about it over the long run because it's just so easy to eat unhealthy, and it's become cheaper to eat unhealthy, and we're just not thinking about these things. And then you throw in there a pandemic where people are staying home and not moving and staying inside, and that throws gasoline on a fire that was already there.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that said, just we know that diet and movement are super important to keeping a healthy body weight. But just speaking of that, one more thing I have a question about is, do you think that obesogenic chemicals are playing a role here?
Yeah, I think there's so many factors, but there's so much, you know, research and science and data that is going to need to be looked at in the long run in terms
Yeah.
of things like that and how it's affecting us. But I don't think we need to get that deep into it for the basic family to really, you know, need to take such a deep dive into. I think you just need to think about, read ingredients, read labels, think about what you're putting in your body, try to eat real food, cook more meals with the family, cook more, you know, as much as you can at home. Try to minimize sugar and chemicals and processed foods and long chemical words you don't know what they are. And if you just do that, you're probably going to get 95% of the way there. Yeah, there's some other things that I'm sure factor in, and certainly our genetics factor in, and everyone's a little bit different. But the reality is that if you're eating crappy food, you're going to feel crappy. Like it's just how it is. It's not rocket science. It's like if you don't, you're built of what you eat, right? We're literally built of what we eat. And if we eat a bunch of crap, then we don't have the building blocks that we need to stay healthy. And your body's got to deal with that instead of the virus that comes your way, or you know, whatever else it is that comes your way. And so at some point, your body's like, well, screw this. I'm going to give out. I can't do it anymore. And you're going to get diabetes. You're going to get autoimmune disease. You're going to get whatever. And I think that's a huge part of what we're seeing these days. There are other things too. I think we're exposed to a lot more toxins and other things as well. But the thing that I think we have the most control over is what we eat. And we actually can make a huge change when it comes to that, and it doesn't have to be significantly more expensive, and it doesn't have to be unfun or, you know, crap, you know, bad tasting. You can still eat healthy and have great food, but you need to be conscious of it and just make it a priority. And I don't think we prioritize our food. We've kind of prioritized making it easier because we're busy.
Yeah. I heard you in another podcast episode, just you were talking about the same thing. And I think the person was asking you about, like, you know, kids and processed foods or sugar. And you were like, you were saying, you know, maybe it is a little bit more expensive. Like it could be, it doesn't have to be, right, than this fast food. But like, also, we just sometimes have to take, we just have to take control of what's really the most important. And our health is, you know, the most important thing. So, and like you said, putting the right foods into our body, more home cooked foods, like that will take some time out of our day. So we have to figure out, right? Like, are we going to do this on a day of the week? Or are we going to do this like every other day that we're cooking wholesome foods? That's something that I wanted to ask you just kind of before we move off of the topic of the importance of food. Like, do you have suggestions for people that are their children are addicted to sugar and processed foods? Like, do you think that people should be meal prepping? I know everybody does things differently, but like, do you do like one day a week where you're meal prepping all the foods for your family? Or have you found a system that has made it easier for families?
Yeah. Okay. So great question. So number one, I would say, um, if your kids are addicted to the sugary foods, who's buying the food, right? You're bringing the food into your home, and usually they're not, especially if they're younger. And at some point, you just have to lay the law down, I think, and be the parent. And if you are going to change the health habits, then you have to say, like, look, we're not going to eat this way anymore. It's not healthy. I'm not going to bring it in the house anymore. I'm not going to buy it. You also have to do it. You can't be eating Oreos and expect your kids not to eat it. You got to get rid of all the food or finish it off, all the packaged foods, and just don't buy it anymore. Buy other things. And within a few weeks, most kids will start to be, instead of getting the chips when they're hungry, they'll get whatever's there. They'll get a carrot, or they'll get some other thing. And it also doesn't mean you have to go from like having all these processed, crazy, sugary foods in your house to nothing. There's an in between. There are other products that are better. They have better ingredients, but there's
Right.
better versions of chips, better versions of crackers, better versions of whatever. So you can kind of work your way down, at least buy some better options. But you just say, like, sorry, we're not going to have those anymore. They're not healthy for you. If they don't like it, too bad. They'll be upset for 5 minutes, and then they'll move on. And most kids do. You're addicted to it, but a couple weeks later, they usually do better. So I think you just that's the first step, is just to get rid of the food, or finish it off, and just don't buy more. You're purchasing the food, so you get to decide what you bring in the house, and just don't bring that in there anymore. So that's number one from your question. Number two was in terms of meal prepping. So for the most part, when we're home during the week, my wife or I, we prepare the food. We pretty much prepare everything always, for our child. So we definitely go out to eat sometimes on the weekend, but we try during the week, especially, and as many meals as we can. We don't buy anything like pre-processed, none of that stuff. I mean, we make every meal. It might be like something that's needs some work, but in general, it's not like a ready-made meal or anything processed. I don't think you ever need that. And you have to keep in mind that whatever you're gaining from convenience, there's a reason, right? So you gotta balance convenience with health, and there are some trade-offs that we always have to make. And yeah, if people are busy, I'm busy sometimes, so there are some trade-offs in terms of the amount of time you may have. But it also comes back to prioritizing it. This is a priority to me. It's a priority to our family, so we spend the time to cook those meals, and that's just what we do. And that may not always be an option for every single family type, but as much as you can prioritize it, but it needs to be a priority, I think. And then number three, back to your kind of original point before we got into the question of the money. I don't know, it makes me really frustrated sometimes when people talk about like money and being able versus not able. And I understand that. I understand there are financial um, constraints that different families have, but you have to prioritize it. You have to do whatever you can within your budget. There's definitely lots of ways to eat healthier that aren't more expensive, could be cheaper, or maybe they're a little bit more expensive. Doesn't mean you have to buy the most expensive food in the world, but you can definitely make changes on a minimal budget. And just think about, like, if you wanted to garden, right? Sure, there's like an initial investment to get that going, but you could just buy seeds, which cost basically nothing, and grow your own food, and then it costs a lot less, and it's way healthier. Right? So there are ways to do things cheaper, but of course that involves a lot of work, right? So that's where the trade-off is. But you can certainly eat healthy enough on a reasonable budget, if that's a priority to you. And yet it's sometimes it might cost more. It just might. That's the reality of the world, and that's not about how rich or poor or whatever it is. It's just this is a priority, and yes, we also should, as a society, prioritize healthier food and make that food cheaper. I don't disagree with that in any way, because you certainly can get fast food in some places where that's a lot cheaper than going to the grocery store and getting fresh produce, and that's a problem. I mean, that's a societal problem, but you as a parent have to deal with your own family, and you're probably not going to change the cost of bananas on your own. We're not going to do that realistically in the short term. We need to prioritize that, I think, as a society. But as your own family, you just got to try your best to think about, well, how can I prioritize health, and where can I find the ways to eat a little bit healthier, and where can I give or take a little bit in terms of the money, and you do whatever you can.
Yes, I love that. So, something that Chef AJ, a friend of mine, says, if it's in your mouth, or if it's in your house, it's in your mouth, right? So you kind of pointed to that. It also starts with the behavior of the parents, leaning, their children are seeing that. And then also, you've mentioned before, like, most children aren't going to starve themselves. And yes, there's going to be a period of like 2 weeks, probably 2 or 3 weeks, like where they're desensitizing their taste buds from these foods, right? So it's like not gonna be fun. It's just like if you take a cookie away from a toddler, like they are not happy. So that's a really awesome tip. And then also, I think that, you were talking about like a hierarchy of food. So just like for an example, like I would told a client like that her husband should probably stop buying the Doritos because her little baby son walks into the thing and he's like wants the Doritos. They're bright neon orange. Like that's, their marketing. So it's like, let's, instead of taking the Doritos away, because your husband's going to get probably a little bit mad about that. Like, let's go and buy the Siete ones. Like there's better ish foods. Right. And then also you said like, trying to buy healthy whole foods. Of course, that's the priority. That's like what we should really be focusing on. But don't let the enemy, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. So if you are currently eating fast foods, maybe just going and get the conventional produce versus the organic, like, right? We have to just take it one step at a time. So I love all of those tips. And I was just kind of beating all of those in. So I hope that everybody gets that point. Healthy whole foods as much as possible, home cooked, super important for the health of our children. Okay, here's a question from a reader. Is giving chlorella daily a good way to help your children detox? What are your thoughts on detoxification? I'm going to fold in another question here, Dr. Gator. Somebody also asked about parasite cleanses for their children. What are your thoughts on children detoxification, detoxifying and parasite cleanses?
Yeah, good question. So it's a tough question because there isn't a ton of research on it at all, right? You have to go with a little bit of common sense when it comes to this, because there's not a ton of research about detoxification. And we were talking about like supplements and herbs and all of those things. I mean, there's stuff, but a lot of these things don't have pharmaceutical trials because they're not pharmaceuticals, right? So we don't have the double-blind controlled studies that we need, and especially not on kids, because most of the times people are not studying these things on kids. So you have to use a little bit of common sense. And in general, a lot of the stuff that is safe for adults is probably safe for kids, but that's where you have to work with your practitioner to kind of go through, look at what you're wanting to use, and then decide if that's reasonable. Also depends on the age of the kid. I mean, there's very different, talk about like a 6-month-old than a 15-year-old, right? So there's different age ranges in terms of kids versus teens versus young kids. So that all factors in, where the short answer is you got to speak to your practitioner about these kinds of things. But when it comes to specifics, I would say in general, number one, you never want to give anything just because for a child, because you never know if something could have side effects. You probably don't want to give anything forever, right? So people asking about like multivitamins or like chlorella, giving it daily. Like, should you give it daily? But for how long, right? There's a big difference. If you're doing it for like a couple of weeks versus for 3 years, it's very different, because anything in a small amount might be okay, but if you build up and you have too much of it, if there's something else in there, how good is the product? Are there chemicals in there as well that are causing issues? If you take it every day, that could be a problem, especially for a child who's younger, who's not processing things as well as adults do. So these are all things you should keep in mind about this. Can you do it? Sure, you can do it. I mean, there's probably not a lot of major concern around something that's food-based, right? Those are usually safer to begin with. Can you do a parasite cleanse? You could. Do they have a parasite? I guess that's the first question, right? So can you do some sort of gentle cleanses? People do it, especially when the kids are older, but I wouldn't probably just do it just because. I mean, I would at least start with stool testing and, is there a parasite in there? And then how do you treat it? Well, it depends on which one, right? Sometimes they need medication. Sometimes there are supplements and herbs that you can use to help. Are they having symptoms or not? And all these things factor in. So for an average healthy child, should you just go do some random parasite cleanse? Probably not. But if you do a stool test and they have a parasite, should you do something about it? Yeah, probably. Right. So it just depends on the situation. So I think the answer is maybe. I think it really depends on the child. I wouldn't. I think the question, a lot of times that kind of question comes from like, should I just do it for my kid? Like, does my kid have parasites? I don't know. Maybe, right? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But should you just throw a bunch of stuff at your kid if they're healthy? Probably not. I mean, you might want to at least start with, if you're worried about parasites, like do a stool test. I've worked with like Tiny Health before, and there's a bunch of companies out there that do it, right? And you can like get a swab, and they can, for people that aren't familiar, though your listeners are probably familiar, but like you can get a little bit of poop basically, and you can send it off to the lab, and they'll tell you about parasites and bacteria and whatever. So like that's a good first step, because if that at least comes back clean, then you probably don't need to do a parasite cleanse. There are other kind of things you can do. And also cleansing, I mean, it gets more I don't know, woo-woo kind of mentality, and it can get kind of out there. But when you're talking about cleansing, look, what is our body doing to detoxify? You're peeing, you're pooping, and you're sweating, right? Those are the big things. So you can, for any child, do things that support that, right? Like getting outside, exercising. More sweating is good. Making sure they're drinking more water or more fluids and peeing more, that's good. Making sure they're going to the bathroom consistently and getting, if they're going every couple of days, get them to be to a place where they're going every day. These are the things that are going to help with detoxification, and they're going to be more gentle, and you could do that for any kid.
And fiber is going to help us move a lot of the concerns out, toxins and other things. So whole plant foods. Okay. Thank you for that. All right. This is like a 3-parter. This is actually from my business coach. How can we boost immunity for our children? She asks me this all the time. I've told her all the things, healthy whole foods. She wants to know from you. She also wants to know about essential oils for kids. What are your thoughts on that? And then also talk about antibiotic usage.
Okay, so those are 3 very different questions. So
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just that they're not really a connected question.
I'll remind you if you forget.
So
how do we boost immunity?
All right, so let's start with immune support. So I talk about the foundations of health. I call it the seeds of health. So being stress, environment and toxins, exercise, diet, and sleep. So by and large, that's the number one thing for immunity, right? All the research that's been done, most of the research that's been done for years, looks at, putting viruses in noses of people. I don't know who was volunteering for these studies, but they did it. And they're looking at, do you get sick if you're sleep deprived versus not? Do you get sick if you're stressed versus not? And all of those studies always show that there's like a 2 times or 5 times or 10 times increased risk of getting sick if you don't focus on your foundations, whatever they were looking at. So like the person who's sleep deprived has a much higher risk of getting sick from a cold than somebody else. So that is the absolute number one way that you can focus on your immune system, because it's a daily thing. It's a minute by minute thing. It's every decision that you make. If you're eating healthy, if you're getting good rest, if you're keeping your stress levels down, if you're getting some exercise, then your body's hopefully working optimally. And then when something comes your way, you have all the tools to deal with it. When it comes to immune support and supplements, all the research on it is varied, right? There's so many people that say, oh, it doesn't do anything. There's a lot of people that say it makes a big difference. I think it's reasonable to try to help give your body as many basic tools as it can that we know that support the immune system, especially if you're deficient. But the problem is we're deficient because we're not eating healthy. Right. So like, I think that if you were eating properly, eating healthy, if our food was better than it was, our food's not the greatest anymore. It's devoid of nutrients compared to what it used to be. Then you would be getting all your nutrients from food or the sun, and you wouldn't need more vitamin D. But as we are right now, most people are deficient in vitamin D. So what's the best way to get it? Get outside more. And if you're in an area that you're getting vitamin D from the sunlight, and get it from your food. But so many people are deficient. So what is the things to do? Well, you can supplement, right? You can support your body for a couple of weeks or a couple of months and boost up those levels to get artificially to a better place, which should help you in the short term. But in the long run, I don't think that helps that much. I think getting it through life is the better way to go about it. But I don't have an issue with supplementation. I think that's reasonable, especially in the short term, but it's not the solution. It's like a Band-Aid, I think. So yeah, getting vitamin D, vitamin C, elderberry, zinc, a multivitamin, all of these things probably help your immune system to some degree. The research, again, is varied, but most studies, when you look at it, it's like, yeah, if you get the flu, then you have like a half day better, or it's a little better. So like, I think it probably does help a little bit. I think that makes intuitive sense that it helps a little bit, but it's not like if you just take a bunch of supplements, you're never going to get sick. I don't think that's the case. I think it's the focus on the daily lifestyle factors that really are what differentiates people with a better immune system versus people with maybe a more concerning immune system, that they get sick more often and get sick for longer. And I also remind parents of this, because I get this question like, how do I keep my kids from getting sick? You don't, like, unless you keep them in a bubble, you don't keep them from getting sick. Everybody gets sick. We're all exposed to things. Our goal as a parent is not to avoid all illness. You don't want them doing silly things like jumping in a ball pit with a bunch of sick kids, right? Like, you don't want to give them an illness, but they're going to get sick. Your job is to support their body as much as you can. So when they do get sick, it's it's a mild cold. They get over it pretty quickly. And then even if you do everything right, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, they could still get really sick. It's also, there's a genetic factor and a luck factor too.
Mhm.
But we're just trying to stack the cards in our favor, and give ourselves the best chance to be healthy. So to me, that's how you keep a healthy immune system, is by doing everything that you can to support your body so that you're prepared for whatever comes your way.
Yeah. And just that kind of rolls into antibiotic use. So for people whose children's immunity has been compromised and they have had to put their children on frequent antibiotics, like what do you have a like try to keep it at one time per year type of thing? I mean, obviously,
Well,
maybe
try to keep it
avoid them as
never,
much.
right?
Yeah.
Never, right? You
Right.
don't want to have antibiotics, right? It's not
No.
a good thing, but it's a good thing that we have them because they
Yes.
can save your life. It's just the question isn't should you use it, it's should you use it in the specific situation, right? We're way too fast in modern medicine to jump to going to antibiotics when you don't need it many times, right? You have some ear pain, go to urgent care, they get, oh, your ear's a little red, here's some antibiotics. You have a little bit of a cough, kid's totally fine, they're like 5 years old, like, oh, maybe it's bronchitis, here's some antibiotics. That's the problem, right? The problem is using it when you don't need it, when it's a virus, when it's going to get better, because again, everything has a cost, right? It's a cost benefit. And if you have a bad pneumonia and you're in the hospital and you're dying, yeah, antibiotics will save your life. That's fine, right? Whatever it does to your immune system, you'll deal with that later, but you need to save your life now. But when you have a mild ear pain and it's going to get better in 2 days anyways, and you give your kid 10 days of antibiotics and you do that 5 times over the year, then that's going to muck up their body. I mean, it's not just killing the bad bacteria, it's killing the good bacteria. Our gut is made up of all sorts of bacteria, and you're mucking up that environment. And when you do that, then that has downstream effects on our health. And that's what, I always try to talk about antibiotic stewardship. Even in modern medicine, we're trying to do that, I would say, but the way that healthcare set up, people are way too quick to give antibiotics and way too quick to want that, when you often don't need it. You just rarely need antibiotics because you rarely have a serious bacterial infection that needs it. Sometimes you do strep throat, if you have a positive strep throat, that you don't want the complications. If you have a pneumonia, there are things where you do. So I don't think a parent should feel bad if they had to give their kid antibiotics, or sometimes even for an ear infection, you need it, right? If they're like a really bad pain, it's been going on. So that's not the problem. The problem is if you use it when you don't need it. And that's where I think we need to do a better job as medicine, as parents, as society, of not wanting antibiotics so much. As we don't want a treatment. You want them to get better. You want to see your doctor and be like, no, okay, it's okay. Come back in 2 days if it's not getting better, and then just be in good communication. If you need it, then you need it. But you have to understand that there's a cost to taking those antibiotics, and that affects your gut health and your body. And most of the time, you take an antibiotic, you'll be fine, later.
Yeah.
But using it chronically, I'm sure it affects your health. How could it not?
Right. And so for those who are taking antibiotics, do you think, I don't know, for a few years there was like all the rage, like, oh my God, if you're taking antibiotics, you must take a probiotic at the same time or after to, get all that back? Or do you think that just repopulating the gut through whole foods is probably the best way to go? Like, do you suggest people take a probiotic when they're, when or after an antibiotic?
Yeah, the reviews are mixed on that. I don't know. I don't know the answer. You look at studies, and some studies say, yeah, it makes a big difference, and other studies say that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's probably based on the situation, the person, the disease, what antibiotics. There's so many factors that probably make a difference. The answer is always eat healthy, right? That's always going to be good. I think the next question is, but should you also take antibiotics? And I think we don't know. I don't think it's a problem.
You mean probiotics?
Probiotics, sorry.
Yeah,
Should you take probiotics if you're taking antibiotics or after? I don't know. I don't have a problem with it. If people, I mention it to people, we have them here. If people want to do it, I don't think you need to. I don't think it's a big issue. I don't know that we know. I think that there's some logic that it might be beneficial. There's some logic that it might do nothing. So I think if you take a good quality probiotic, it's probably either going to be helpful or do nothing. It's probably not going to cause a harm.
Do you have a particular brand you wouldn't mind sharing?
Claire is the most common one that we use.
Claire Labs, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then can you talk about essential oils? What do you think about essential oils? I think I'm just going to kind of link this to immune health and or to be used as treatments. I mean, are they too volatile for us to be breathing in and diffusing, or too volatile to be putting on our kids' feet, it's on our spine? Like, what do you think?
I think essential oils, especially if you get a good quality one, there shouldn't be any issues with it. For little kids, some of them can be too strong. There is, some very sporadic research from before that, like it can be too strong for some kids and can cause breathing issues. So we're talking like under 6 months.
Mhm.
Older than that, I think it's about the quality of the essential oil. If you have a good quality actual essential oil, then people have been using this for generations and, for forever basically. And I don't see why that couldn't be helpful to some degree, especially if you're using it in very small amounts, if you're diluting it, all those things.
Yeah.
Then, could you have a reaction to it? Sure, you could smell a peanut and have anaphylaxis. So anybody could have a reaction to anything. But by and large, to me, logically, it's probably a net positive. It certainly lets you do something as opposed to taking antibiotics when you don't need to do antibiotics. So I think that could be helpful. Rubbing a little bit of it on your skin, probably fine unless you have a reaction. So don't put it everywhere at first. But I think there's probably some good benefit from it that makes logical sense to me. I don't think it's gonna cure you of anything, but just like other supplements, I think it's one tool in your toolbox and it can be very helpful. And just think about how it affects your mood, right? It's like you walk in, you smell something nice that you like, and then it uplifts your mood. So these things do affect us. They certainly do. How much is probably not a lot, but even if it improves something by 1%, that's pretty good for something with pretty minimal risk.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This one should probably be short. At what age is appropriate for young people to begin weight training or strength training?
Strength training, weight training. So these are all good questions with a lot of in the middle answers, but most people say once you're fully developed, then you can start weight training, strength training. You don't want to before your bones are all fused. I've heard lots of therapists say you can use your own body weight, so you can certainly exercise, right? Exercise is good for everybody. It doesn't matter how old you are. Usually for the younger teens, I've heard the recommendations from the therapist of use your own body weight, do more reps, not heavy, because that could affect your growth plates and your boat plates. If you do something too heavy, then you can have a fracture or other things like that. So ideally you wait until you're a little bit older. But once you're fully grown, your growth plates are fused, and most of the therapists I've ever worked with have said, yeah, then you can start doing strength training if you want to.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, somebody has a question for the top 3, but I'm just going to ask you your top 1. What do you think parents and doctors are still holding on to in terms of like an old school thought when it comes to health? I know that that's a random kind of hard one to just kind of pull out.
No, I think it's a good question. I'm just trying to think of what's a good. So old school is focus on treatment instead of prevention, right? I think that is one of the biggest things that we see every day is a focus on treatment, and then also a lack of recognition of the side effects or the potential issues with the things that we do are like medication. So like we're talking about antibiotics. I think the ease at which we just give an antibiotic like it's nothing, or a medication like it's nothing, and don't really have any sort of sense of the possible complications of that, or but not that we don't have the sense of, but we don't respect that it can have negative consequences. And so it's easier to give something to cover your butt than it is to have a 20-minute discussion about why you may or may not want to take it. I think that's a tough part of medicine, and a lot of it comes from the modern medicine style of seeing patients really quickly, right? I mean, it's hard with insurance to have a model where you have more than a couple of minutes with patients. And so most people come to the doctor, they want something, they want to do something, and it's easy to give them an antibiotic, but that's not always the best thing. Doing nothing is often the best thing, and having a discussion is often the best thing, but that's, kind of old. That's like the way that we just haven't changed it. We haven't gone back to thinking about prevention or any of this stuff. We're just focused on here's a treatment, let's get better, let's move on, let's be fast.
So prevention. Okay. We already kind of talked about supplements a little bit. What is a more effective way outside of medication for ADD and ADHD?
Okay, good question. So with the ADD, ADHD, depends on the child, right? Because some kids with medication, it can be really helpful. I'm not against medication. This kind of goes back to everything. I just think that we're way too fast to diagnose it and we're way too fast to treat it when there are so many other things that you can do. And so to me, the biggest thing, number one, is make sure you've done a full, thorough evaluation. Make sure you've worked with someone that's tried other things, that's thought about other things. Unless it's a super, super, super severe case, which sometimes there is, then sometimes you need it because they're really not able to perform at school or whatever it is. But usually, if you focus on the diet, that's always going to be number one. That's where you seem to get the most bang for your buck. Like kids have a gluten sensitivity or dairy sensitivity, you remove those, that helps a lot. There are lots of supplements and herbs that can help with calming, and that can help with cognition and thought, like magnesium and amino acids, and even just multivitamin, just making sure we get all we have all the vitamins and nutrients that we need. These things can help. They're not the same as a medication. Obviously, those are much stronger. But if you kind of work your way through and you do a little bit of that, so you change your lifestyle a little bit, you change what we're eating, you give them the nutrients. Maybe you work with a therapist who works on some strategies for how to work with the issues that you're dealing with, maybe how to calm down a little bit better, or help work on focus, or different things like that. Usually come from different angles, and you might be able to improve things 5, 10, 15, 20%. And that might be enough for that child. It might not. They still might need medications, but maybe they need a lower dose. Or maybe it's enough for right now. And then you can kind of keep working on these things. And then you're doing 10 milligrams something, then 5 milligrams, then 2.5 milligrams, then none. And you're working your way down because you're working on everything else around them to support them. And that is at least my goal, when working with patients, or what the goal should be. It's not to put you on medication for life. Sometimes you will need that, but when we're looking at the levels of diagnoses that we're seeing these days, the amount of diagnoses, the amount of medications that are given, there's no way that all those kids need that, right? Some of them do, but it's much easier to get a quick diagnosis, give you medicine, and say good luck, than it is to spend the hours that you need to spend to go through nutrition and go through sleep and go through stress and go through the way that you're eating and what you're cooking and what you're buying. That's what you have to do if you want to avoid using medication. But you have to spend the time, and it's never going to happen in the regular medical model because they don't have that kind of time. That comes down to the parent wanting to look for alternative solutions, and then working with a variety of practitioners to go through each of these different things, whichever, depending on your kid, what makes the most sense. And then working your way through. And you have to take your health and your family's health into your own hands. It's not going to happen in the medical system. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go to your doctor. It doesn't mean you shouldn't work with them. But if you want to work with your child outside of the medical system in terms of focusing on some of these other things and spending an hour per week or 2 hours or whatever it is going through some of these things, it's not going to happen at your 5-minute doctor's visit. You need a nutritionist, you need a therapist, you need there's other practitioners out there that work on these things. I mean, there's so many, we're lucky that these days, like, there's so many other modalities out there that biofeedback and acupuncture and acupressure and yoga. There's so many things that you can do depending on the child that could be helpful for your child. And if you can find that right thing, like some kids have gone to karate, or things like that, like they've channeled their energy into something, and that helps them a lot at school, or they learn discipline. And these are things that kids do that avoid medication, right? And it doesn't mean that's going to work for your kid, but that's what I think you should be thinking about as a parent. That's what I try to encourage people to think about, because at the end of the day, it's your kid. You got to figure that out. And we're just there to try to help guide you, but you're there every day with them.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of just like thinking, trying to focus, and we've also talked about immune health, I wanted to ask you if there's any specific mushrooms that you have seen children have success with, or like chaga powder or lion's mane, or
those are the ones.
are kids taking this? I know adults are. I know adults are using mushrooms in all different ways, but
cordyceps, chaga, lion's mane. I mean, those are obviously three of the ones that have more evidence. I don't think younger kids, for the most part. I mean, there's not research, right? I think there's very little research on kids. So it's a lot of it is personal choice. Is probably low risk, I would think, but especially for older kids like teens, I think it's probably okay. But these are things you have to talk with your practitioner about, and then have somebody just watching you on them. You can be, again, you go back to always so you can be allergic to anything, you can have a reaction to anything. That's always true. But when we're talking about things that are food, which mushrooms are food, your risk is, if you're taking a reasonable dose, like a low dose, is pretty low for these things, because you will just process it. It might do nothing, but might do nothing for you in terms of positive, but it's very unlikely to do something in the negative when you're taking a good quality one with a low dose, like half the dose of an adult dose or a quarter of the dose or whatever it is, depending on the age. You're unlikely to have a reaction, but it's always possible, which is why you always need to work with someone to keep an eye on you when you're trying these things. But if you want to try it, I think that's fine and reasonable. I just, there's not a lot of evidence that it does or doesn't work, but it probably does. Probably helps a little bit, right? Just like supplements do. I imagine that if you are giving your body the tools that it needs and the vitamins, the nutrients that it needs, it helps you to do things. That's what food does, right? If you give your body the nutrition that it needs, then you can think better. If you don't have breakfast in the morning and try to work, you can think, right? It's like this, that's basic common sense stuff that's true of everything. So I don't see why it would be different for supplements or nutrients or mushrooms. I think that all works the same, and then everybody's different. So some people might react really well to something and they might not work well with something else. So it's a little trial and error too. And you just have to use your common sense and try things and see what seems to work.
Thank you. Okay, just a few more questions. What about organic vegan protein powders for a 15-year-old?
Okay, when it comes to protein powders, I would say you can do it if you want to, but again, it's better to get it from food, right? It's better to be eating properly and eating food and getting nutrition that way. If you're trying to bulk up or you need more protein, then depends on the quality of whatever you're eating. I mean, organic's better than not organic. I'm not sure if vegan is better or not better. I mean, maybe for you, if you're vegan, that's fine. It's probably not too much different when it's in a powder form. But I think that if that's something that you want to do, it's probably not dangerous. But the younger you are, the more likely it is to be dangerous if you're taking something like that every day and it overloads your body and your kidneys with something that's not, quote unquote, normal. It's not food. It's like a powder. It's still synthetic. So I think it's something to be cautious of. If you're doing it every now and again, it's probably less concerning. If you're doing it every day to exercise, then there's certainly potential for there to be a problem, especially if there's something else in the powder that's going to cause an issue. So like you don't always know exactly what's in there and how many times there have been recalls on different things. And if you're taking some powder and there's some chemical in there or aluminum or whatever, a metal, something in there that's not supposed to be there, then that's when you can really run into trouble. So I just think it's something to be cautious of.
Thank you. And then very last question before I ask the question that I ask everybody, how old is a typical child out of diapers and pull-ups? Going down to a youngin.
Ooh, yeah, it's very variable. So some even little kids in the first year can be out of it. There's all the new kind of trying to train your kid when they're super young. That's not usually super effective. I would say most kids are potty training on average around 2.5 or 3. So it depends how well that goes. Most kids are out of some sort of diapers after 4, 5, 6 years in that range, but lots of kids are still using it older. So it's a very wide range. It depends on how much you work on it as a parent with the family, with the kid, because some kids at 2, 2.5, you're working with them every day. You're taking them outside. You're taking the diapers off. You're like, you're not wearing a diaper anymore. We're not doing it. Those kids will learn. When a kid will do it on their own is probably a lot later. Right? Most kids if it's easier just to go in the diaper, they're not going to actively try to learn. So it might be 4, 5, or 6 before they're wanting to not wear a diaper anymore. It just depends. Even some kids older, and then it also depends for nighttime how deep a sleeper they are. There's not much you can do for a super deep sleeper if they're going to have accidents at night. Eventually, it usually goes away. But there are lots of kids at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that are still having night accidents because they're just sleeping through it and their body doesn't wake them up. Usually in your teen years, you get to that point where your body does wake up. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm guessing the question is around some sort of toddler, 4, 5, or 6.
It's actually about my son. It's actually about my son. My husband was like, "Oh, ask him about potty training." I was like, "Okay." It's just our son is in a pull-up at night, and he sometimes sleeps through it, and he's 5.5, and I'm like, I really think that this is totally normal. Like he sleeps super deep, and he'll get up and be like, and I'm like, do you have to go to the bathroom? And he's like, yeah, like he just can't, connect the dots. So that was
if he's waking up, that's a good first step, right? I mean, there's nothing, there's literally, I mean, people try, but there's really nothing you can do. I mean, you can decrease what they're drinking before bed and that kind of thing, but you can't if a kid doesn't wake up and they pee, like there's nothing, you're not gonna, I mean, you can wake them up, I guess, before,
Yeah.
but it's not, they're just gonna get it when they get it. So especially at 5, that's super normal. I mean, it's even normal at 10. So
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and watermelon, like he eats copious amount of watermelon. If we give him any watermelon, it's not just a little, it's a lot. And I'm like, okay, no more watermelon before bed. It's just not gonna work. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for your time. I have one more question, then we need to know how to stay in touch with you. I ask everybody this question. What does holistic living mean to you?
To me, it means really thinking about all of the things that you do, being conscious of everything that you put in your body, everything that you do to your body, everything that you put on it, thinking about the food, the stress, the sleep, all the things that we're doing, living a holistic life, being mindful of what we're doing, and trying to focus on health, as opposed to thinking about things later like treatment. You want to live a holistic life so that you can be happy and healthy and do the things that you want to do, and have that vitality and excitement in life, as opposed to dealing with whatever comes your way kind of thing, getting ahead of it.
So, yes, I love that prevention. Okay, we can do this, you guys. Okay, so how do we stay in touch with you, and where can we find you, and how can we support?
Sure. Yeah. So the main places where people find me on Instagram at Dr. Joel Gator. Same thing across the other platforms. And then my website is raisingamazingplus.com. Lots of parenting resources there and courses and things like that. So if you're looking for more in terms of parenting and holistic health and holistic pediatrics or pregnancy, we got courses on all that kind of stuff.
Fabulous. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing what you do, and we appreciate your time so much.
Thanks for having me on.